All right, welcome everyone. Today I have Chief McFarland from Effingham PD. He has 30 years experience in law enforcement, and I'm really excited to have him as a part of the Words of the Wise podcast. So, welcome, Chief McFarland. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Of course, we were talking just now offline, and Effingham is considered the heart of America and has some really cool things that have happened in its past. And I was hoping that you can share that because I find that to be really, really cool and fascinating.
Yeah, actually, it's for such a small town, it's a real cool nugget of information. But right after the Civil War, we had a resident. Her name was Ada Kepley, and she was the wife of a local attorney. And she later went on to become the first female to ever graduate law school in the United States. Of course, at that point, though, she could not take the bar exam because women couldn't be lawyers. And at that point, women couldn't vote. So she was a very vocal proponent of women's suffrage and women's rights and went on to lead in that. Even to this day, our patches still say the Heart of USA, and it's labeled everywhere in the city.
I love that. And I love to see people paving the way, and I don't know if she understood the gravity of that when it happened, but now look where we are, and women are allowed to be lawyers and police officers. And so I love that there were early people who stood for what they wanted and paved the way for others to follow. I think that's really cool.
No, absolutely. And it's great that we just have that little piece of history here in our town.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you are fourth generation. Maybe you can give a little bit of background into who you are, your family's experience in law enforcement, how you got involved in law enforcement, just a little bit of background and context into your 30-year career.
Yeah, I am a fourth generation police officer. I never had the opportunity to meet my great grandfather, who served with the Illinois State Police. And during that time frame, it was a pure political job. So if the governor changed, then they removed all the troopers. So he went later to work for a municipal police department here in Southern Illinois. My grandfather worked for the Illinois Department of Conservation Police for 30 years, from the mid 50s to the mid 80s. And I had many great conversations with my grandpa about law enforcement and just seeing and learning about how things were done. And it's just so black and white and remotely different than what it is today. Then my father served for 30 years at the Illinois State Police, and retired out. And I actually had about an 8-year overlap or 5-year overlap with my father to where I was in law enforcement. So it was a great opportunity. And then, growing up in a law enforcement household, it was just like law enforcement is kind of like firefighting. It's a family business, so it tends to be generational. So that's what I grew up. Is all my extended family were members of law enforcement. Those are my aunts and uncles, and it's that sense of family and tight knit and sense of purpose that
Mhm.
really got me into law enforcement. So there's never really a question of what I was going to do. It's just who I've always been, and I've been very fortunate to actually get the role and the opportunity to do what I've always wanted to do.
I love that your family inspired you and that it gave you that sense of purpose. I think that there are so many other professions out there that don't give you that sense of purpose. And the fact that you grew up with people who led the way for you and it's something that you always knew you wanted to do, I think is really cool. And I think it's also a testament to like this job is inspirational. Like there are still people who want to be in law enforcement and who see people like you and their family members in this career and think that it's an admirable position to be in. And so I love that you had that. I know that you had 3 decades of experience in law enforcement. What experiences did you have that shaped the way that you lead today?
Well, I went to several trainings, and one of them was really insightful. And the instructor said, "I want you to get a piece of paper and write what the worst thing a boss ever did to you was." And everybody started scribbling away because we've all got those notes. And then he said, "Okay, throw the paper away. Don't ever do that. You're already a better boss than they were." So I've always taken that to heart. Is you try to treat people with dignity and respect, both in the community and your coworkers. Um, and you have to actually care about the people you work with. And I I think that's a big part of it is if the employees know that you sincerely care about them and their well-being, that it's going to make a good culture and a good environment they're going to want to work in.
Yeah. And first of all, I love that. I think that that's genius. Write down the worst thing that a boss has ever done, throw it away. You're already better. Just don't do it. I think that's incredible. But I mean, I would say that it's so true. Like you learn what to do, but you also learn what not to do in life, and in your career. And I would argue that I've learned more about what not to do from people than I have what to do. And I think that for me a lot of times that was my biggest fear in life was, I'm like, man, I didn't really have good role models. So I don't know if I would do a good job. If I didn't have someone who, showed me a good path, then like I don't know a good path. And now I actually think, no, they showed me exactly what not to do. And that's what is going to make me even better. So I love that mentality. And I do think that like you learn from the good and the bad in people.
Absolutely.
I know that, in doing this podcast and in being this wellness space for the last 8 years, I know that wellness has evolved a lot over time. And I would imagine that your family, especially, they have seen like, wow, like we didn't have that, when we were in our careers. And I would say that, probably the last 5, 6 years is when things have really started to progress and evolve over time. How has your perspective on wellness evolved throughout your career? Because we know, when you started, maybe those resources didn't exist or were very little, and now it's something that's a major focus. So how have your perspectives evolved over time?
Yeah, we've been hearing about it for several years, by last 5 or 6 years, and it started off with an officer wellness program that sounds great, and then for us it's been piecemeal over the years. I mean, there wasn't a program developed for us and given to us and say, here you go, here's your roadmap, you're doing great. It's we're learning as we go, especially being a smaller community in Southern Illinois. We're kind of isolated regionally from the resources I have available. So as we went along, there would be suggestions or things we'd pick up and learn and implement slowly over time. So we're still a work in progress. We're not done by any means. We need to improve more. But I do believe that as a profession, law enforcement's come a long way in the last 30 years, and officer wellness is a big part of that.
Yeah. And why do you think that it's so important to have resources organizationally?
Um, Whenever we onboard somebody, we have them assessed with psychologists to make sure they're going to be a good fit.
Mhm.
And historically, what we've done is we've done that, and then we've hired them, and then we put them in a uniform, and we kicked them loose and said, "Good luck in this toxic environment. Hope to see you in 30 years."
Yeah.
That hasn't worked out well for us. So that's been one of the biggest concerns we have to address. And I'm happy though this younger generation, like the stigma of mental health and mental wellness is gone with them. It's just not as present. So that's one of the big struggles we've had is overcoming that stigma and getting to normalize that topic.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Like I haven't heard it from that perspective of like, hey, in the beginning, we make sure they're good. And then we kind of just kick them out and we're like, good luck, kid. Hope to see you in 30 years and don't really have those, or maybe historically haven't had those checkpoints throughout the career of like, are you still good? And if you're not good, what can we do to make sure that you are so that you can see 30 years, and I think that's the ultimate goal. I mean, organizationally, you want to keep people there, you want to make sure that they have a long career, but I think individuals also want to feel good at the end of a 30-year career, and not feel broken or have some sort of crisis that's happened. And I know in speaking offline, you maybe have had some personal experiences with people who you've maybe known throughout your life who have had some mental health challenges that have impacted them because they maybe didn't have the resources or maybe didn't feel safe to ask for those resources. What has your experience been with that, and how has that really influenced, the way that you do things now and the resources that you try to make available for your people?
Yeah, my father-in-law, excuse me, my father and I have, of course, several traits and experiences in common. And unfortunately, one of those is we've both had to investigate the suicide of a colleague. And with me, this is somebody I'd known for 20 years, talked to in passing on a regular basis, and was really surprised when this happened. And then during the investigation, I found out that he was struggling and he was looking for help. And I think that we as a profession failed him.
Mhm.
And that was one of the really, I guess, flashpoints that said we've got to do better. And I know that's just not specific to Illinois or any state. That suicide, in law enforcement, it's an epidemic. I read an article this morning that the largest police agency in Illinois, Chicago PD, and
Mhm.
they've had 53 suicides in the last 10 years. Now, if you think about that, and if it was in any other profession, if that was doctors or airline pilots, I think there would be people screaming for accountability and reassessing how we're doing things. But it's unfortunately just not newsworthy, and it's just not looked at.
Yeah, and it is a sad reality, and it is hard to look at those numbers and wonder, what's missing, what can still be done to help improve that and to reduce that risk. Because I do agree with you. I think that there have been great strides that have been happening. And I do think that agencies care, obviously, in having these conversations with you. Like, I know that you care and it's something that you're prioritizing. I think the question is like, how can we do better? And like, what can we continue to do to make sure that there isn't that stigma, to make sure that there are the appropriate resources available if and when someone needs them. And I know in speaking with you, there are, quite a few things that you're focusing on, organizationally. And I was hoping you could give, because I think that a lot of people don't realize that most law enforcement agencies are smaller.
Mhm.
They're not all these huge organizations like, LAPD or, a lot of agencies come from smaller, more rural areas, and there's some challenges that come with that. And so I was hoping you can maybe give some insights into some of the things that you're trying to do and maybe some of the challenges that you've had along the way with providing resources.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We have a 27 officer department here, so in Illinois we'd be almost like a mid-sized department.
Mhm.
But there's just many departments with 5 officers or less, and they're even more in dire straits of finding resources than we are because there's just less available. So as I said earlier, we're kind of piecemeal in officer wellness. So there's a bunch of little things we started doing that really didn't cost that much. For instance, every officer we hire, they get a book. It's called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement,
Mhm.
and they're told to read that while they're still in FTO. And if they have a significant other, we give them the book I Love a Cop to
Mhm.
give them the idea of what they're getting into because this job isn't just a 9 to 5 job. This is if something's going to impact the family also. And if the family's not happy, then your officer's not going to be a productive officer.
And I know that too, I've heard a lot of really good things about both books. So I love that that's something that you start early of like, hey, day one, like read this. Because, honestly, I've had a lot of conversations with other leaders who are like, you know what, I was given that book early and I didn't read it. And then I read it 20 years into my career or 25 years into my career. And I was like, man, why didn't I read this? They're like, that's me. They related so much to the book and they're like, I really, really wish that I would have had this. Maybe they didn't have it earlier, maybe they just didn't read it earlier, but they're like, I really, really wish I would have read that earlier. So I love that that's something that you start. And I'm hoping that people are actually reading that because I have heard from a ton of people that it's been so helpful, with their own personal wellness and just understanding, kind of the tendencies and what happens, and having that relatability of like, oh, I'm not alone in feeling those things, or doing those things. Um, I know that we talked a little bit about, talk therapy and maybe the challenge of being in more of a remote area and maybe not having access to individuals who are used to working with law enforcement. And I know that right now you're in maybe, kind of the early stages of trying to develop a regional peer support team to, provide more of those resources because with a smaller agency, everyone knows each other. And you had a really funny comment to that, and I was hoping that you could tell everyone, kind of your thoughts on it. And if you don't remember, I'll throw it out there.
I recall quite well. And the reason we want to go regional
Yeah.
is we have other size departments in this area. However, they're 30 to 40 miles away. So I may know a few officers in those departments, but I don't know what goes on in those departments. So if one of our officers needs to talk to somebody, peer support should be somebody close enough you can have a cup of coffee with, but doesn't know all the ins and outs and what's going on in your agency. And you have to worry about that bleeding over to your support.
Yeah, and I loved that comment, like close enough to get a cup of coffee, but not close enough to be in your business. Um,
Yeah. Law enforcement's a small world, so yeah, that's important for us.
100%. And I think that honestly, this idea of regionalization with wellness is going to start expanding. And I'm all for that. I think that if you guys can band together and provide more resources as a whole, it's only going to benefit everybody. And I think that that's a conversation that a lot of agencies are having right now. How can we have more, regional support systems or, regional peer support? I'm also hearing conversations of regional peer support for executives. How can, at an executive level, you make sure that you have the resources you need to take care of yourself? Because, in the conversations that I have, it's like it's lonely at the top. You don't have anyone to go up to, and it might not feel appropriate to go down and speak to, some of the other members within your organization. And so I think this idea of regionalization is going to start expanding, and I think that it's going to be a really positive thing.
Well, I think so as well. I'd have to acknowledge the Illinois Chiefs of Police Association. They do a great job with peer support. This is one of the things I went to new chief school. It was for 5 days and learned all kinds of nuggets of wisdom. But one of them is your peers are now other police chiefs. They're not your coworkers. They're not the officers that, this is who you have to reach out to. And that's been absolutely 100% true. And I've been very fortunate to have friends and mentors and other departments as chiefs of police that have really helped me succeed.
Good. Yeah. And I think that that's so needed. Regardless of what role you're in, you need to have someone you can talk to. And, the higher you get, the harder it is. And so I'm really happy to hear that. And I know that there are a lot of states out there that are doing that are like making sure that there are resources for not only the organization, but also executives. I wanted to talk a little bit because you mentioned earlier, you said kind of the younger generation, the new generation, and how things are maybe a little bit different. I know in speaking to other agencies that recruitment and retention is a huge topic right now. What are your insights on how you can adapt to the younger generation, and how can you not only retain but hire new employees?
The generational gap is a real thing, and I personally have struggled with this. The younger generation, like when I started, pay was one of the top things. How much money am I going to make? What are the benefits? And now studies are saying that pay is not even the top three. It's 4 or 5 with them, and it's a sense of what's the job going to do for me, and how's it going to fulfill my needs. So that's how we have to kind of address it. And an officer wellness program is a part of that.
Yeah.
It is okay. I'm going into a job, but they're actually going to help take care of me, not just by giving me a gun and a bulletproof vest in a car and saying good luck. So that is one of the things that we found was key was that you have to really shift your focus on what's important to them and how to fulfill those needs.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important message. And I actually didn't know that it's not even the top three. So you just taught me something because I wasn't aware that it was top 4 or 5. I knew that it was shifting to not be the most important thing, but I didn't realize that it was, 4 or 5 on the list. We know it's so competitive right now, and maybe some areas more than others or some states more than others, but I've heard of some, states where they're quite literally fighting each other like for the same pool of hires. They're all like competing against each other and trying to one up, the next person to find the best candidates because the pool isn't as big as it used to be. And there are a lot of agencies who are offering financial bonuses for that. And the feedback that I'm hearing is that's not always what is enticing. It's not necessarily how much money, and for some people it might be, but they are looking for, okay, well, what kind of wellness resources do you have? How are you going to support my physical and mental health? Is this a community that's supportive? Is this an organization that's supportive? And those are some of the top selling points. And so I think to your point, you're exactly right. If you have a culture of wellness and you have resources where you say, hey, like, we're not going to give you the $5,000 bonus to come here, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that you have the best shot at a long and successful career because we care about that. Sometimes that's more of a selling point than, you know, whatever monetary bonus is being thrown out there.
Yeah, that's I understand the higher bonus and all that on that, but I've never been a big fan of it because I frankly think it's somewhat insulting to the officers that are already doing the job. We
Mm,
didn't have this when we hired them, and they've done this job great for so many years, and so I'm more in favor of using that funding on just making this a better department to work for,
yeah.
and that in turn goes into then our officers are our biggest recruiters because
Yeah.
when they go to these regional trainings, they're talking with other officers and they're discussing the issues they're having. And on a side note, our community is the best thing we have going for us. We
Mhm.
have a great community that supports the police, a low crime rate. We have really good pay and benefits. So it's that's where this is the place you can come to work, and the schools are good. Um, some of the officers I deal with, they can't send the kids to public schools, and they deal with that cost, and the community doesn't support them. So it's all of that really makes this kind of a good place to work.
I love that you said your employees are your biggest recruiters. And I think that takes a mental framing of saying, you know what, if we start with our people first, if we start with our foundation, our culture, and we make this a really good place for people to want to be, like they don't drive past the station and go, oh, they want to be there, then that's going to be what helps with your recruitment. And I really like that because you're right. If people are like, hey, like, come over here, like, we have a great culture, we have a great community. I love working, with my peers, I love working with my community, then other people are going to want to come there and be a part of that family unit.
Right. And I wasn't successful, but something I wanted to do was kind of reverse the sign-on bonus process, which would pay our employees every person they recruit. So if we hire somebody and they graduate the academy, you get X amount of dollars, and they graduate, get out of the probationary period, you get X amount of dollars, and to reverse that process. But I think that would probably be more effective than just trying to hand people money to work here for a few years.
Interesting. Yeah, and I mean it also like that all goes towards retention too.
Mhm.
It's like, and I think that is also important. And I think a lot of times, there's the conversation so much about like recruitment, but I also think retention is so important. How can you keep people there? And I think to your point, if you create that culture, maybe there's incentivizations in some point, for them to stay. But I think the ultimate incentivization is that it's just a really good place to be, and they're not injured, they're mentally well, they have the resources that they need. How important do you think it is to have community support and community engagement as it pertains to mental wellness?
Oh, it's critical. Um, if you go to work in this toxic environment and what you're doing day in and day out isn't appreciated by the people we serve, then it makes the job a lot more difficult. It's great in this community that we hired an officer from another agency that has a bit more violence. It was Norm, and we took him to a church picnic, which has about 1,000 people, and he's like, "How many fights are going to be here?" I'm like, "None." It's like stabbings? No, no, no. So you're gonna get a lot of God bless yous, and somebody's probably gonna give you a free hamburger, and that's our community. Um, So we're very fortunate for that. We have the overwhelming support. And that's another part of why you want to be part of this department and part of this community.
Yeah. And do you think that there's anything that you guys have done throughout the years that has helped to create that support from the community? Is there something that you guys have done like proactively to get there and maybe, something that other agencies can do to try to create that community support?
That I think just comes over naturally with some transparency and
Mm.
accountability to the community. Um, if something happens, I mean, the public trust is the most crucial thing we could possibly have. And if you lose that, you're going to really have a difficult time trying to be an effective police department. And we're
Right.
fortunate to have that, and we build upon it. So we do have programs in which the community can come and interact, but we also, at our department, emphasize customer service, and that's a big one. Um, Gordon Graham, a phenomenal police trainer,
Mm.
said that customer service should be your focus, and we do. So that's how we use that lens when we're dealing with the public.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. And I like that you say like transparency and accountability.
Absolutely. If you're caught trying to hide something from the public, you won't regain that trust.
Yeah.
So it's crucial that we maintain it. And even when we make mistakes, you fess up to it, you own it, and you move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think that I mean, it all circles back to wellness, right? It's like, how can you do things proactively? How can you be more transparent? How can you be more accountable so that the community supports you? That's going to help your mental wellness. Obviously, the organization is helping you as well with your mental wellness. Do you think are maybe some of the biggest challenges with wellness still today, whether that's individually, organizationally, maybe what are some of the things that are still hurdles that, still kind of need to be like worked through?
Ours, as we're dealing with it here, is we don't have the adequate facilities with the
Mm.
training for police officers as far as counselors. Ideally, what I would love to have is a program where every year officers on a voluntary basis could go meet with a counselor just as a checkup and to
Yeah.
get used to meeting with that counselor and normalize it. So when there is a problem, that relationship's already been established. However, we don't have anyone in this region with that certification. We do have a local mental health facility that's in a doctor's office. However, our officers are there probably once a week dealing with people that are out of control. So there's no way our officers are going to go to that same doctor's office and sit in a waiting room next to the person they just wrestled last week. So
Right.
it's critical we get that far enough away that our professional lives aren't bleeding over into our personal lives. And that's where we're struggling. Every year I make contact with another regional hospital, and every year they're like, yes, somebody's interested in this, but it just hasn't materialized, and it's frustrating. Now I know that telehealth is an option that they have, psychologists available, but I don't think that is the same as meeting somebody in face, person to person, and having those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, like to your point, I mean, I could totally get that, like not wanting to go sit next to someone that you just
Hmm.
arrested or handled the week before. And I also see the challenge of because there's a hurdle of like, okay, well, you're going to drive an hour to go do it because maybe like a neighboring city has something, and that could be a challenge too because you're asking someone now to take 3, 4 hours out of their day to go do something, and people maybe would be a little bit resistant to that. So I can see that that's a challenge for sure. What do you think is the solve? What do you think is, kind of the next step? Is it just,
I'm really hoping that we do get somebody in our regional area that gets a certification. And we deal with, we're a union city, so the police have a union contract. So we have to deal with that also. But I would ideally love to see this done while they're on duty. That if we have adequate staffing and you're on day shifts, that you can dress to plain clothes and while you're working, go take care of this.
yeah,
And if possible, you can even turn that into take the rest of the off as a mental health day.
yeah.
Uh, that's something I'd like to do. However, that's going to take cooperation of the union.
Yeah. And like you said, it's kind of like piecing things together. Things take time. And it sounds to me like there are a lot of ideas that you have that are beneficial, that are kind of thinking outside of the box of like, how can we make this work? I know that, you talked about nutrition as well as something that, you find to be important and something that you want to incorporate within your organization. What are your insights or your perspectives on nutrition and the support that, people are wanting or needing?
That's a good one because anytime you mention nutrition to cops, they're gonna, oh, I know I'm overweight. I know won't eat well because of the job we have. However, I had the opportunity to see a presentation by normal police chief Steve Petrelli, and he is a absolute just knowledge base of nutrition, and he can explain it into a way in which police officers actually find it interesting. So, uh, as part of our wellness program, we did bring Chief Trelly to our department. I believe it was for 1 or 2 days, and try to get as many officers as we could into that program. And when they came out, they're like, I had no idea because it's such a complex issue, and he explains it in a manner in which we can understand. So I encourage anyone has the opportunity to see Chief Petrelli, definitely do that. It's worth it.
And I think that that's an important message, just in any sort of training, that you make sure that that person knows their audience and can speak to their audience. And I love that you said that he said all these really great things in a way that we could understand, because that's so important. If someone comes up and they're just talking gibberish, it's never ever going to help anybody. And I think that this is a unique profession and it has a lot of unique challenges and stressors and shift work and availability of nutrition while you're out on the streets. And so there's a lot of like nuances that need to be addressed that are different than, maybe someone who has a 9 to 5 job. And so I love that you said that he knew how to speak to us specifically.
Right. Credibility is a big thing in law enforcement. So if you bring in somebody that hasn't really done the job and they start talking to the police saying this is what you should do, there's a good tendency they're going to just discard that, not pay attention. But when you get somebody who's been doing the job for decades and succeeding, that's the person we want to learn from.
Yep. And I think that that trust or that like credibility goes really quick.
Yes, it does.
First few minutes, I think you can sniff out like, okay, this person knows what they're talking about or they don't.
Yeah, we're really good with detecting that when people and when we hear that, there's a good chance they'll just tune out and then
Yeah.
the rest of the day's wasted. But not with the Chief Petrelli. He just did a phenomenal job, so I can't recommend him highly enough.
Good. Yeah, I'll have to look him up and see, some of the stuff that he's doing because, anytime you can find people who are doing good things in the space, I always want to connect with those people because I find it fascinating, to be in the wellness space and to hear different perspectives. But I think that to your point, like whatever resources that you're putting in place, the ultimate goal, because it takes resources, right? It takes funding, it takes time. You're getting people to buy into it or at least to participate, which also takes time and effort. And you want to make sure that things that you're putting in place are actually benefiting people. And I say this all the time, but like you could have the best program in the world, and if no one uses it or people don't buy into it, it doesn't matter. You want to make sure that the information is actually benefiting people. So I love that you guys have put in place, certain things, especially with nutrition that was well received and, benefiting your people, because I think that's the most important.
Yes, and it's kind of grown, I guess, naturally in some things. So with the nutrition class, we learned, of course, we have a weight room, and that gets used a lot. And the officers and I give them so much credit for this. When we have a new facility, when we moved in, there wasn't a weight room, and they said they wanted one. And instead of just coming with their hat in hand asking, they raised money to
Mhm.
purchase all the weight equipment. So we've got a great workout room, and then we find out that a sauna is actually a great resource for this. I had no idea. Then the officers went out and actually found quotes and found what would work. So I think we're the first police department in this area that actually has a sauna. And it amazed me on how much it gets used.
Yeah.
It's used all the time. So I'm so thankful for that. But it's just something I never thought of. But it's been great.
Do you think if you were to like time travel back to 30 years, if someone would have said, you guys are going to have a sauna, that you would have believed
You
it.
asked me 2 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it. However, what we learned that in some of the training, and it's like, well, why not? I mean, that it's not a huge expense. It's something we can do. And if I could go back to community support, we're also really fortunate here that we have a budget line that's community donations. So we have people and businesses like, what can I do to support the police? So this is a line where they can put money into, and it doesn't go to pay our power bills. It doesn't go to pay for gas for squad cars. It goes to pay things for directly benefit our police officers that we normally wouldn't use tax dollars for, such as the sauna and the gym and other things. So we're fortunate to have that support and that ability to fund those items.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And do you think that that's something that's normal, or do you think that's just something like really unique that your community does for you guys? Because I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Yes, I've never heard of it either. And when I first became chief, a gentleman I never met came in to meet with me and just wanted to say, "Hey, I think you guys are just getting the short end of the stick. The media is nothing but negative news. I'm worried about your people. What can I do?" I'm
Mm.
like, well, I appreciate that, but we're good. He's like, "No, I'm going to make a donation, and this is what I want to use for the employees." So that's what started our retirement party, funds and our Christmas luncheons and the other things that really help us kind of come together more as a group and not use tax dollars on that. That's important for us.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the little things like you said, and it kind of circles back to what you talked about building a culture and a community, within your organization of like having luncheons and Christmas parties and things that like people feel like they're a part of a team or a part of, an organizational family. So I love that you're thinking about those things too, because I think that that matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one last question for you.
Mhm.
What words of advice would you give to someone who's earlier in their career, maybe something that you wish you would have known or something that's helped you along the way?
Wow. There's just so many nuggets. The best advice I can give is find a mentor, and it doesn't matter what part of your career you're in. Find somebody that knows more and has experience with what you're trying to do. So I was fortunate when I became a police officer. I wanted to be in investigations at some point in my career. So while I was at patrol, I had the opportunity to learn from some of the detectives and gain some insight from them. And that's continued all throughout my career, including being police chief.
Yeah, I love that. I love those words of advice. And there's been so many times, I don't know if you can relate to this, but there's been so many times in my life where I'm like, man, I wish I had someone who could have set the example for me, or I wish I would have, known this earlier. And so I love those words of advice to find a mentor and someone who you respect and you look up to that you can, help with your growth and development.
Absolutely. That's been, I think, very helpful in my career. Is somebody's already made that mistake. Just learn from them before you do that, and you're better off than what you started with.
100%. If you have anything else that we miss, I'll let you have the floor.
No, that's okay. This is just something for you to kind of have knowledge of, and if you come across the future to pass this along. I was at a training, and the instructors, there's 400 of us. It's like, how many departments have psychological screening as part of onboarding? And almost all the hands go up. And he's like, how many departments have psychological screening for retirees right before they retire to figure out what baggage they've got? Not a hand went up.
Wow.
Reached out to our psychologist that we use in Champaign, and he had never heard of it. He's a nationally known police psychologist, and he was, I've never heard of that. So he actually developed a program that just for now, it's just for us that we send our retirees to. So if you're talking to
Oh,
chiefs down the road, I have heard nothing but great things from our retirees that went and met with him. And also, our retirement is a big stress time in our lives. We're losing that identity. So it's good to have that program to kind of get them on a good first step.
yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think it's a great point. We know that retirement is really tricky. It's really challenging for a lot of people. And I've had a lot of conversations about this of like, well, one, like, how can you proactively take care of yourself throughout your career so that when you do reach that retirement age, you feel good, right? Like physically and mentally, you're good. Um, but then how can you also prepare for like phase two
Right.
of your life? Because there's a lot of things that you lose or that you feel like you're losing when you transition out of this career. You know, the camaraderie, the team mentality. A lot of people feel like maybe they're losing their value. And how can you prepare someone mentally for that? And what does that next chapter look like for you? And to your point, is there 30 years of bottled up stuff that you didn't take care of? And then when you do feel like you lose those things, your sense of purpose and, you know, all those things, are you going to be okay mentally? Because we see the stats on everything. Like we know the life expectancy after retirement for a number of reasons. We know that suicide rates in retirement are high. We know that heart attacks are high because of, you know, cumulative stress. And nutrition plays a role in that too. But I think if you can set people up for that, if you can be proactive with that, I think that that's great because you want, like, to me, that's the saddest thing ever. It's so sad if like you spend 30 years of your life giving to others and being in service of your community, and then you die in 3 or 4 years and you don't get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. I think that's so sad. You know, I would hope that your retirement is as long as your career. Like that's what
I
you want.
I hope so. I want to draw that pension as much as I can.
Well, I appreciate your time so much. Thank you so much for being here and for, you know, sharing some of your time. I really do think that our time is our most valuable asset. So I appreciate you sharing some of your time with me today. And hopefully we'll stay in touch. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Of course.